Hello and welcome to Unscripted. I'm Kavita Vai. In today's program, our featured guest is Professor Karen Hallberg. But what is Pugwash? Based on its manifesto, Pugwash seeks a world free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. The organization earned the Nobel Peace Prize in 1995. Dr. Karen Hallberg was awarded the 2019 International L'Oreal UNESCO Award for Women in Science Prize for Latin America. It was in the year 2024 that the Pugwash Conference on Science and World Affairs announced that Karen Hallberg, professor of physics at the Balseiro Institute and the principal researcher at the Bariloche Atomic Centre, National Atomic Energy Agency, and National Research Council Argentina, as its next Secretary General. Dr. Hallberg traveled to the Islamic Republic to push for a world free of nuclear weapons. Professor Karen Hallberg, welcome to Unscripted.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here. It's my second time in Iran. I'm from Argentina. I'm a physicist from Argentina. I work in the south of Argentina at the Bariloche Atomic Centre. It's of the Argentine Atomic Centre, Atomic Energy Commission. And the first time I came in 2016, so it's really an honor to be back. I really enjoy coming here. You know, somehow I feel at home in spite of the cultural differences, religious differences, but the people are very similar. So I feel at home, and thank you for hosting me.
Well, that's great. This format that we're in right now, which is a special edition of our program in the TDF format, given the fact that there's this summit that's happening in 48 hours, this being the second day. After I saw the title of your institution, I need to ask what this title means and if you can give us a little bit of a background so our viewers get educated on this.
Yes, sure. The institution, it's a non-governmental organization. The name of it, you said it, it's the Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs. Pugwash is the name of a very small village in Canada. And that was our first international conference, and that was held in 1957. I wasn't there, I wasn't born yet, but the Pugwash Conferences were inspired on the Russell-Einstein Manifesto. So our institution was created by Bertrand Russell, Albert Einstein, whom everybody knows, and 9 more prominent scientists who had been awarded the Nobel Prize in science, chemistry, and physics, and literature, because Bertrand Russell was awarded the Nobel Prize in literature, but he was a mathematician and a pacifist. So they
and a philosopher, right, Bertrand Russell?
And a philosopher, yes. I'm inspired by his books because he's so rational, but also so humanistic. So this was in 1955. The Russell-Einstein Manifesto was signed, and the Russell-Einstein Manifesto called for 3 points. The first point was to raise awareness of the enormous danger posed by nuclear weapons, because in those times, remember, the 2 nuclear weapons had been launched on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. And in around the 60s, the thermonuclear bombs, the H bombs, so the fusion bombs were developed. And at that moment, scientists said, we must gather to see and to discuss the consequences of our scientific development and try to call for peaceful uses. So the first one was raise awareness. The second one was to necessarily find peaceful ways to solve conflicts, because we cannot wage wars in these times where we have nuclear weapons, because we risk the possibility of destroying mankind and all living creatures on the earth. And the third one, they call for conferences of scientists plus decision makers to try to engage rationally, evidence-based, and in a candid way to discuss problems that have to do with security and human development and new technologies. So we're also studying AI. So it's very necessary. It's part of our responsibility as scientists to get engaged in these discussions.
I understand that you are involved in this issue on the scientific side of it. But when you mentioned the mere fact of weapons of mass destruction, which nuclear weapons is one of them, that is something that Iran has actually been very much promoting for this Asia, this region, which we call West Asia, people call it Middle East, to be a region free of nuclear weapons. And it's something that Iran's leader has actually issued a fatwa against the acquisition of nuclear weapons or the weaponization of the nuclear program in any shape or form. What's your impression of how Iran has been trying to promote this, even though the success at this point has not been what it has foreseen it to, that it actually wanted? Because we know that, again, the leader is against any type of weapons of mass destruction.
Yes, and this is very important to convey to the general public outside Iran, because this is not well known. You know, I come from Argentina, but also in the West or in other countries, it is not well known what the fatwa says, and this strong commitment of Iran not to develop weapons of mass destruction. And its willingness to try to install a weapons of mass destruction free zone, we call it WMD free zone, which includes nuclear weapons, chemical and biological weapons, of course. Now, I think I'm very happy to see these discussions, but one has to bear in mind, and Iran knows it, of course, that Iran is a party of the NPT, of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran has signed it and ratified it. So Iran is already, through the NPT, committed to non-proliferating and to develop nuclear technology for exclusive, peaceful uses. However, additional deals, and mostly given the current situation, which is very volatile, very risky in the region, it has been for many years, since the first JCPOA and even before. It has been a necessity from other countries. I'm trying to look at the balance to really reassure that Iran wants to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. So this is why an additional agreement is welcome. You know that in Latin America, between Argentina and Brazil, we're both countries that have highly developed nuclear technology. And there was a rivalry in the 1980s. But physicists and also politicians and our presidents after the comeback of democracy in the 1980s, they reach an agreement which is exemplary, which is called the ABAC. It's the Argentina-Brazil Agreement for Accountability and Control. And this is in addition to the nuclear weapons free zone there was in Latin America, the Tlatelolco Treaty. And this was just right before they both joined the NPT. So they're not redundant. These mutual confidence building measures of verification and control always add. So I think Iran's attitude is very positive in the sense that it still maintains its adherence to the NPT, and it should continue like that, because any other alternative will be very dangerous for the rest of the world. I see this as a pivotal moment, and it's in the hands of Iran. Iran can show it's difficult to negotiate. I know there are many other topics. I mean, but it's a moment where there is like a crossroads. If this moment is solved, if Iran instates its commitment to peaceful uses of nuclear technology and reaches an agreement, this would be also not only good for the increase in security in the region and internationally, avoiding escalation, but it would also be useful to develop the region. It will be beneficial for the people of the region and mainly from Iran. But Iran has to be insistent in the right of developing nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, for nuclear energy. It's not only nuclear energy, I mean, because we have to think about global warming. We need nuclear energy. That's
a very important point.
And all the other applications of nuclear technology, like medicine, sterilization, agriculture, so this is, I think, the short answer is it's very important that Iran would continue with its high technology.
Indeed. Well, the politicization of this issue with Iran in particular has been overwhelming in terms of its trying to prevent Iran from, as you said, be entitled to the rights that it is entitled to under the NPT. But let's take a segue here and talk about something we discussed before coming on, and that was your impression of Iranian engineers. You mentioned, described how there are so many or the advancement that Iranian engineers have made. Maybe you can give us your impression of that as to what information you have on that.
Yes, I'm a physicist, but I did my PhD also in my national lab in the south of Argentina. I told you, the National Atomic Energy Commission institution, but there's also the career of nuclear engineers. And we've had connections and collaborations with Iranian scientists and engineers, and we've always been impressed, me in particular, we've always been impressed by the level of the education, of the training of scientists and engineers. Last time when I came in 2016, I was telling you I visited the Atomic Energy Organization, and we also went to Yazd.
Did you speak to anybody at the Atomic Energy?
Yes, of course. I gave a talk. I was talking about my own field of research, which is quantum properties of materials, superconductors, etc. And then we gave also talks in Yazd, and we exchanged. So there is something that is called science diplomacy. And science diplomacy is scientists working towards the betterment of humanity, increasing risk analysis, exchange, cultural exchange, knowledge exchange. And this is what we do from Pugwash. It's science diplomacy also. It's a cultural exchange through science.
Excellent. Haven't heard that, science diplomacy, but it's something that I should have thought that it's probably has been exercised, but now you gave it prominence to that topic.
Well, Pugwash was one of the first institutions, was the first, I would say, that started with the science diplomacy without giving it that name. And then in the beginning of 2000, it was already gaining momentum. When you want to really visibilize something, you put a name to it. That's and right. Now it's called science diplomacy.
Science diplomacy, yes. Excellent. When we talk about nuclear energy, we know that it obviously has civilian purposes that's being used, as you mentioned, Argentina, Brazil. But one of the countries that is giving the pressure on Iran is the United States. And it's interesting that at this juncture, we have the indirect talks that are happening. Perhaps this goes beyond the, I'm guessing, field that you may cover, but it's interesting that we're having those two talk indirectly. And I'm wondering if you think that there's going to be any results coming from that, which this region truly needs for there to be some kind of agreement in order for peace to prevail, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Yes, I think it's very important to have that these dialogues are taking place, very important. So it's important that the US is open to that, it's open that Iran is open to that, and also the countries in the region that are sort of supporting these dialogues. This is very important. We are totally pro-dialogue. Now, when you start talking, you start realizing where you can reach a common agreement. And the agreement always has to be based on respect for development of the countries. I see it from the point of view of the Global South. We need Argentina, Iran, the Global South has to develop. We have our own rights and we need sovereignty. Now, we also have to assure, we have to show, we have to prove that we are reliable too. So one of the aspects I think is very important is to have regional reinforcement, confidence-building measures and agreement, like the one I mentioned between Argentina and Brazil. There was a rivalry, and we reached this agreement. This region, West Asia, is very, of course, the political situation is very difficult, and one needs to really resort to very complex diplomatic approaches. But the technical aspect is there. You have the diplomatic and the knowledge in political science is also there, and it's a question of talking. We have to reach confidence, and the only way to reach confidence is not by waging wars; it's by talking. This is why I'm optimistic that there will be an agreement, and I hope it's for the betterment of all the world. This agreement will be really important for the whole world, because it would, as I tell you, I see it as a crossroads, as a pivotal moment, because if the agreement is not reached, then there is an increased risk of proliferation of nuclear weapons, and this won't be good. So I think it's a really important agreement that will show the pillars of the NPT, the right of peaceful development of nuclear energy, plus the commitment to not proliferate, and also not to develop nuclear weapons, of course. And this is already taken as a compromise by Iran. So I'm optimistic, and I really hope so, for the sake of the whole humanity.
Indeed. Let's hope that something does come out of it. On the other hand, perhaps like no other time have we seen the possibility of a nuclear war breaking out, unfortunately, when it comes to the conflict that exists in Ukraine. We saw the way that Russia and the U.S. Came very close in that regards. What were your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think that that was something that was really being contemplated between the two?
Well, the situation, we analyzed it with our colleagues and with experts on the field. The risk of a nuclear confrontation is very high. If you look at the atomic clock, at the doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, it's a very interesting symbolic message, and it's a doomsday clock, the clock of the end of the world. And this has been installed in the beginning, since the Manhattan Project, right after. So it's a clock that tells you how many minutes we are from midnight, midnight being a nuclear confrontation. And now it's the closest, we are 89 seconds from midnight. This is symbolic, of course, but that means we are the closest to midnight, closest as ever, closer than ever, because it also includes misuses of other technologies like AI, genetic technology. So the risk of nuclear use is big, and this is where this dialogue and this agreement between Iran and the U.S. is so important, because it would really mark a point where one is really tilting the clock towards a better world. I'm sure that this clock will go further away from midnight if the agreement is reached.
Okay. The thing that caught my attention in your statements, aside from your views about Iran and also the way that this nuclear indirect talks are moving forward, you said the misuse of AI. Are you talking about that in the nuclear phase, or can you give us a brief intro to that?
We organized a webinar together with other organizations in February this year, and we invited a Nobel laureate, which is Geoffrey Hinton. Geoffrey Hinton is a Nobel laureate in physics from last year, and he is really trying to raise awareness of the dangers of AI. Not only he, many other people, of course, and so there is an urgent need of really reinforcing regulations in general on AI. But in particular, AI for nuclear weapons is dangerous because it's AI in the command and control of nuclear weapons. So you have to, there is a great discussion now on how much to allow AI to decide on when to launch a nuclear weapon and to include a human in the loop, etc. But this is still, I think, still needs a lot of revision. And imagine if we have a deadly weapon like the nuclear weapon, which is a weapon of mass destruction being controlled by AI. So this is the worst of the world. So we really have to be careful, and this is why we're trying to raise awareness on this. So we cannot have nuclear weapons and AI. We have to get rid of nuclear weapons, and AI has to be controlled. We cannot get rid of it because it's useful. So this is my point of view.
Well, the move towards elimination of nuclear weapons would be very ideal, but we are still seeing that to be tested when it comes to, I guess I'm going to call it rivalry between the U.S. and China, for example, because China has expanded its arsenal from what we understand, but it was being pushed somewhat by the way that the U.S. has approached the whole China factor, which they seem to think that they call it competition, but it's not really competition. Do you think that there will be a day where we're looking at the elimination of weapons of mass destruction like nuclear weapons, or are we far from that yet?
We are a little bit far. The situation is getting worse now, so I regret to say that. If you look at the NPT was good to reduce the amount of nuclear weapons from about 70,000 in the 80s, 70,000 nuclear weapons. You have to just imagine that number, down to about 12,000 there are now. But it's not a question of numbers, because 70,000 or 12,000, they can still destroy humanity. So it's not a question of numbers. So Pugwash and myself were committed to trying to eliminate nuclear weapons. And there is currently a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which is a TPNW, which hasn't been signed by nuclear weapon states, of course. But it's very important to maintain, because it's a way of delegalizing nuclear weapons. You know, chemical and biological weapons are already prohibited, so why not prohibit nuclear weapons? The thing is that they are so destructive, and they still give prestige when they shouldn't give prestige, because it's having a weapon that can destroy humanity. This shouldn't be the prestige of anyone.
Sure. My last question is, when it comes to go along this topic, when it comes to the way that nuclear weapons are in possession of certain countries, we're looking at how they are not member of the NPT. In this region, we look at the regime in Israel of how it has nuclear warheads, but it doesn't either admit to it nor does it deny it, but it's not a member of the NPT. Iran is trying to push for that idea to be discussed, even with the indirect talks that are happening, to promote that idea. How successful or far off will that be, that effort?
We are still far. I'm sorry to be negative, but we really have. It's important to know and to be realistic to try to work on that. I could not say we are on the verge of eliminating nuclear weapons. We're very far from that. However, I think it is not necessary to wait for peace in the region to get rid of the nuclear weapons, but both things have to be done simultaneously. The weapons of mass destruction free zone. It's very important to maintain. You know, Israel and Egypt were the first ones to propose this region. And it sounds utopian, but it should be still maintained because at some point it might become a reality. Now, the nuclear weapons of a country like Israel is the only country in the region that has not, it is not part of the NPT. Its nuclear weapons do not help its security in our view. I mean, obviously the country has a different view since they have them. But for example, it doesn't give security to the country because even if Iran had nuclear weapons, it could never launch a nuclear weapon on Israel because you have Palestinians, you have the black rain, you have radioactive fallout. So it's not a realistic scenario for this region.
Okay, I did say it's the last question, but I do have, since we touched on this subject, it's a particular stat that I'd like to get your reaction on. Yes, Israel did not use nuclear weapons when it came to the genocidal war in the Gaza Strip. Understood. But based on the statistics that came out, there were enough bombs that were dropped on the Gaza Strip that one compared it to how it's equivalent to 3 nuclear bombs being dropped on it in terms of the amount and weights of the bombs. Isn't that shocking to hear that kind of stat?
It's very shocking. This is a tragedy that is happening in Gaza. It has to stop. It has to stop, and there has to be dialogue. I know it's difficult to regain dialogue, but one has to understand the security issues of both sides. Israel wants the release of the hostages, which is understandable, but Gaza wants its own country. The people want to live in peace. They don't want to be displaced. So this is a tragedy. The level of destruction is enormous. It's equivalent to nuclear bombs. What happened? I mean, during the Second World War, we also had destructions equivalent to nuclear bombs. What happened in Dresden, the destruction of the city and other cities with air raids. However, this is also horrible, and it has to be controlled and avoided. But one nuclear weapon is by definition defined to kill civilians and innocents. Weaponry for war is not defined. It's a weaponry that is defined to fight a war between militants. So, but when it's badly used and against international laws and international humanitarian laws and the conventions of Geneva, then this is a misuse, and this has to be avoided. Okay. That brings us to a close. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and educating us on this very important field. And science diplomacy is going to remain in my head, etched in my mind for a long time after this interview. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Professor Karen Hallberg, Secretary General, Pugwash Conference on Science and World Affairs. Thank you. And 1995 Nobel Peace Prize winner. Thank you for joining us in this edition of the program. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you. And that does it for this edition of Unscripted. You heard a professor talk about nuclear weapons in the formats that she did and put it into context for us. And as I just mentioned, science diplomacy is something that perhaps is a new terminology for you. But in order to even get a better idea of that, do log on to our website to catch a repeat of the program, all the W's at presstv.ir. From Mikhail Tavai and the team here at Unscripted, it's goodbye.